Hello lovely people, I'm looking up at you a bit because I've got you in my camera stand. Anyway, I thought I'd just appear, you know my face. Welcome to this week's Slowstitch. I just wanted to tell you that I've just rewatched my introduction to Slowstitch video, which was one of the first videos I made here at the end of 2023. I just wanted to hear what I said to see if I had anything to add, or if, you know, how we evolved to think about things and so on. And actually, if I had to make it again today, that video, I wouldn't change a word. So I'm going to link that and put it up as the video, you know, when this one ends, the little one for you to watch. So if you haven't seen it and you're new here and you don't know what Slowstitch is or how I think of Slowstitch or anything. It's only 18 minutes long, it's one of the shortest videos I've ever made. This week I'm going to work on my book project that I talked about last week, which is for a group of women that I'm part of, all Slowstitchers or all with an interest in Slowstitch, and we're having a retreat in this September. And we're each making a page. There are 10 of us, so we're each going to make 10 pages. Then we're going to each give the other a page that we've made, so we'll each end up with 9 pages, you know, one from the others and one of our own. And then during the retreat we're going to assemble them into some kind of book. And I've made a few already. I've finished another couple which I'll show you, and today I'm going to start, I think it's the 5th one, so it'll be the halfway mark of the pages I have to make. And the page that I'm going to make for this week will be inspired by Japanese Boro, so I'll talk more about that while I'm stitching. So let's get onto my desk and get on with the stitching. Okay, so here's my little rice bag that I'm keeping this project in. So I will open it. In here I have got, well, these are my little scraps of blue that I'm going to use for the page I'm going to start working on today. This is my ball of wool and my circle template, because each one is going to have a circle of red wool couched onto it, representing community and, you know, the circle of friends, the circle of us women. And then I've got the others. Some of these I've shown you already, but you might be new here, so I'll just quickly show you them all again. So this one here was cloth collage. So it's just little pieces of little scraps of cloth laid on, overlapping, and I used the invisible based stitch, which is a little stitch on the front and a bigger stitch on the back, which I learnt from Jude Hill, and I know many of you who have been here a while use it as well. And then I did my fancy stitching kind of in both directions. I couched on my red circle using my template, and then I did some more red stitching around, excuse me, and I did some French knots as well, because those relate to, as I'm working on these, I'm thinking of the person whom it's for. Kind of, that's part of the mindfulness of the project for me. So the technique that I've used and the stitches that I've used and so on relate to the person that this is intended for, on some level, you know. And you can think about that in many ways, and maybe I'll talk more about that as I go along as well. So that's basically cloth collage on a backing cloth. This was the first one that I made. This is cloth weaving, so that's strips of cloth woven together and then stitched, and with the red circle, also on a backing cloth. This is just a bit of old curtain that was actually hanging here in my home when I moved in, but it was, you know, holey and not very nice, so I washed it and makes perfectly good backing. This is a log cabin done sort of raw edge and folded and so on, again with lots of stitching, and I did a little double cross stitch in the middle and the red circle. And this is the one I've just finished. This is English paper piecing using a little hexagon template, and I used the dark thread deliberately so it kind of shows, because I like to see the stitching. And then I did it the grandmother's flower garden, and you see it's super wonky. Actually, this cloth is wool, very fine wool, and it was a piece of cloth that I eco-dyed, eco-printed, and it was the hem of a gardening apron that I made out of an old French nightdress that I bought on a flea market in France that was too short, so I added a a frill, you know, a piece around the bottom of this, and eventually that apron fell apart, and this is a bit of the salvage frill. This again is cloth with history, you know. I mean, the piece of wool was new wool, but it was given to me during a workshop, a few years ago, that a friend of mine ran, and so it's got that memory of that workshop with her. It's a week-long workshop, and I went to help. I went to be her assistant, and she gave me that piece of wool. And then it was on my pinny, you know, for 3 or 4 years. And then the pinny, because it was already old and falling apart, just fell too far apart. And now it's in this, which is going to be gifted to one of my friends. And there's, again, another meaning, another layer of meaning with the hexagons for this particular friend, and the red wool circle. So that's the 4 I've done so far. So this one, now we did this last year, if you followed the Stitch project in 2024. We looked at Japanese Boro in one of the weeks, and I'll link that video as well if you want to go and see that if you haven't seen it. This I did slightly differently to how I normally do it. These pieces, like I said, are all on a backing piece. This, I'm not going to use a backing piece, I'm just going to construct it from the scraps. I also need my thread. I've got this little spool of French mending thread, sorry, coton à reprise is darning thread, that's the word, that I'm going to use as well, because it's a mending thread. Boro is the Japanese craft or art of mending. Textiles were so precious that everything was patched and mended, and you can't make Boro. I talk about Boro inspired or in the spirit of Boro. You can't just sit and make a piece of Boro. Boro means rags. It evolves, you know, and you'll see vintage pieces for sale now for huge prices. They're very, very precious and beautiful, if you like that sort of thing. So what I'm going to make now is in the spirit of Boro. So that's why I want to just piece it out of scraps. I don't want to sew it onto a back cloth, onto a backing piece. And it's a slightly different way of working. You know, it can be a bit intimidating if you're not, you know, used to stitching bits of cloth together in this way without having sizes that fit together and all that. You know, you have to kind of jigsaw it and make it up as you go along. But I like it. I find it almost liberating to not... There's 2 things about that backing cloth. One is that it's a comfort, you know, it's your template, your framework in which you can put your pieces. The other thing is it's restrictive because it's a certain size and shape, and you know you have to stay within the bounds. So it's how you look at it, isn't it? It's like a lot of things, how you flip it, if you can flip it to be a positive thing. Now this cotton is much finer than embroidery cotton, and it's 4-stranded. So I think I'm going to use 3 strands. How many strands are there? That's only 2 strands. So I'm going to get another length. So I've pulled 1 strand off, which means I've got 3 strands left, which I've put over there for the next time. I've got a great long lazy girl length. I don't know what that noise was. I've got the windows closed. It's a bit warm, but there's quite a lot of neighbour activity. It's sunny weather again, so everybody's outside doing stuff. Right, so I've just threaded that into there. We don't need that. And I'm going to put a knot. I'm using white, or it's actually an off-white, because that you often see as well in, if you look at traditional, you know, vintage actual Boro. I'm making a knot. That's not commonly done. It's a habit. I didn't actually mean to do it, but anyway, I've done it now. So I've got various bits here, probably way more than I need. I've got smaller bits and bigger bits, and the hardest step, as in many things, is the first step, I find. So I just go through them until something speaks to me. That piece does, I think, because it's a wonky shape. It's not square or rectangular or, you know. And then I'm just going to get another piece, maybe this piece. And I'm not doing seams because I'm going to work both sides, sort of, you know, alternately, but not with any particular rhythm. So I'm just going to put that to there like that. I've overlapped by maybe 1/4 of an inch. I'm just going to do running stitches along that line, just to hold those 2 pieces together. I'm not doing sashiko, which is the Japanese word for the stitching. Sashiko actually means little stabs, but you'll see it done in all kinds of patterns. But the word sashiko itself, it just refers to the stitching. And that's done with a very long needle and a special thimble that goes around the base of your finger, and you make a rocking motion, and you load the needle with several stitches at once and then pull through. But I'm not going to do that, I'm just doing it, you know, the normal way that I stitch. So that's my first two bits joined. So now I just need to join another bit, and I'm not trimming anything or doing anything like that. I'm just going to look for another bit of cloth, maybe this slightly bigger piece, and I think I'm just going to stitch that to there, and I might actually go and work on the other side. So then I might turn it. This is double-sided, this is actually vintage Japanese kimono. So there's different things to bear in mind. I've gone with blue, you know, because it sort of is traditional, but you can obviously use any colours or a mixture of colours if you want to. But the other thing that I'm bearing in mind is the thickness of the piece, because I've got all different cloths here, mostly cotton, but I think there's a little bit of silk here and there. There's some linen, there's some that's also cotton, but you know, it's all different thicknesses. So I don't want it to get a great big bulge in one part and really thin in another. So there we go, and it's an odd shape, and you just keep making it until it's bigger than you want, and then if you want it to be a square or rectangle, you can just trim it back. So now I want something across here. So once you've got the start of something, it becomes a lot less intimidating because you respond to what's there. And I don't need to get a triangle to fit that space, that little space, necessarily. I can just cover it like that. So imagine now, what I'm imagining is that that is a tear in a futon cover or a jacket or something that I need to patch. So you would just take a patch of precious cloth, probably salvaged from a piece of textile that was past it, you know, that was too worn to be used. You'd save the good bits of cloth and use those as patches. Should have a bigger needle. I feel this is struggling a bit with the eye. Now dog barking. And see, I just stitched across. It's all flippy floppy, but that's fine. I'm not worrying about that for now. And it will be two-sided because it won't have a backing. And I will do more stitching once it's, you know, once I've constructed it. And I'm just going to work my way around. I'm leaving this because I like it, but of course if you want to trim it and not have that, then you absolutely could. It's not wrong. I don't like saying things are wrong. They generally aren't. It's just all a matter of taste. This little piece, because it's triangular. And if you end up somewhere where you've got a straight edge like here, I might then decide that this is an edge. Or not, you know, but it's responding to what happens as you stitch. So I'm just going to turn and stitch that way, and I'm not going through all the piece. So I'm just going to move it down a bit. Because all this cloth is quite thin and fragile, I'm fine with my layers. I'm just saying, just be aware. A lot of people use denim because it's, you know, indigo blue and widely available. Well, especially if it's got lycra in, which a lot of denim has these days, it wouldn't be pleasant to stitch if you started getting, you know, too many layers. I'm going to change my needle because it's not behaving. I use this needle for 2 strands of floss, but apparently 3 strands of this is slightly more than the thickness of 2 strands. I'm just going to go up a needle size. Number 9. That's a number 8. Right, let's see if that behaves better. And I'm aware there that I've gone wonky on the corner. I don't mind. It's the way I look at it is it's almost like a time lapse. That's better. So I'm creating this in however long it's going to take me from little scraps, but I'm kind of imagining over time that a piece is evolving, you know, that it's being mended and then it's being torn and worn and then it's being mended again and so on. So this was what I said about a straight edge, but I'm here now. What I could do if I didn't want to stitch here anymore, in fact I think I will, is just go through, maybe turn it over, just because I'd rather stitch that way and hold the body of it in my hand, and then just go down a line and just stitch my way back again. And I'm doing quite big stitches, but you know, and I'm not worrying about them being even or anything like that. So although it might seem scary to start with nothing and just start sewing bits of cloth together, there's so many ways you can work, you know, that you can just stitch yourself around the cloth to get where you need to be, that there's really nothing that can go wrong, she said, famous last words. So, and I now have come to this join here, which wasn't joined, so I can now take the opportunity, I might go in one further, and just work my way up to there, turn back, and then just stitch my way back down that little flappy join. I'm just jumping across with my needle to get to where I want to be. And I'm doing running stitch everywhere, but there's no reason why you couldn't do other kinds of stitching. I sometimes do an overcast stitch, so come down onto this pale blue piece and work your way along a bit. You do have to look out for the tension if it's very fine cloth, so I'm just forever pulling it back into place if I pull it a bit too tightly. And then into this, so I'm just doing, do you see an overcast stitch? It's as if I was couching, like I do with those red circles, only there's nothing there to couch except I'm kind of couching that edge down. And it just gives a different rhythm to the stitching. So now, if I want to stitch a piece on up here, I'm just going to stitch myself up that way. I just like to keep turning it over, because otherwise you get focused on one side and you might start getting precious about it. And also I want to make sure that I'm happy with the way both sides look. So I'll turn that over. Maybe I'll find a piece for here. Maybe that piece wants to go there if I'm saying this is my straight edge, but then I need another piece in here. So I could put that on, but I think I'll put that on afterwards. So I'm just going to stitch that piece on. So I need to get there, I'm just going to stitch my way there. I don't want to be cutting my thread and starting again until I run out of thread, and then I have to, obviously. If you wanted to put little pins you could, but it's so tiny at the moment I'm managing to just hold it in my hand, and I don't mind if it goes skew whiff or anything like that. Now I'm back to that edge, but that I have decided is my edge, so I'm not going to sew anything else onto there. We're aiming for somewhere in the region of a 6-inch square. Mine are all different sizes, but you know, they know me, I'm sure I'll be forgiven. So I now, so I don't want to sew anything here, so I'm going to stitch myself back that way again. This is really flimsy, so I might double that up. I might just put something on the back, and there I'm just listening to the cloth. The cloth's very fine. I don't really want to just stitch only through that one single piece of fine cloth. So I'm going to get a little strip of something. This I'm going to audition because it came from a friend of mine who mostly works by machine, and some of her cloth, she was sorting through her scraps and I took some. Some of her cloth is quite high thread count and I don't like hand stitching it, but that's okay. I'm happy enough to stitch that. And that's a cut edge, so I'm going to fluff it up a bit as well. A torn edge is much less frayed than a cut edge, and I think more beautiful frayed, because it's got entire long pieces of warp or weft thread. Can't get that out, so I'm going to leave it in. So I'm going to just lay that on I'm going to lay it that way around. This actually, the other thing I should have said is some of these, like that's a commercial print. So on that side it's the colour and on that side it's very pale. If you have solids, or you know, some of these that I've indigo dyed myself, they're obviously solids, then you won't have that double-sidedness. But you can still use them. You can either just embrace that's the back of the cloth, quite obviously, or you can just get something thinner, you know, when you look at it at the end. Like I've got this really fine piece of cheesecloth here. Come here. And then just stitch that over that at the end if you didn't like the look of that. So there's always something you can do. And now I can't remember what I was doing. I was stitching that on, wasn't I? So I'm going to just stitch that over where I've already stitched. So now that stitching is going to be hidden, but I don't mind. That would happen if it was a piece that had been mended and mended over the years. So to me that just makes it more authentic. So now I'm going to go back to the other side, I think. I'm going to have to jump a bit over. No, I'm just going to go straight through back to the other side. And now I'm into that single layer that I just added. That's still flopping. I'm not worried. I'm just going to, because I'm working on a surface as well, it makes it easier. If you're working on your knee, then you might want to use pins. So now I need to put something else here. You see what I mean about how it's doing a jigsaw? And of course I don't have to use the whole thing. In fact, I might plot it. Let's put it that way. I don't think it was that way, but it doesn't matter. And I've made a corner here, so you know, that kind of gives me that limit maybe. So I'm going to come through onto it, onto the surface of the piece I just added. I think I'll turn it that way and stitch that edge down first. I'm also feeling underneath because I'm aware that I've got that longish strip I just added that's flippy floppy, and I'm just being careful that that doesn't happen and I don't stitch it folded. But you know, probably a pin would help. But like I said, because I don't usually stitch on a table, by the way, I do usually stitch on my knee. There are some things I would do on a surface, like for example cloth weaving. But in general, if I'm just sewing, fly in here again. If I'm just, sorry, I was distracted by the fly. If I'm just sewing, generally I do work on my knee. But you know, you obviously have to do whatever's comfortable for you. So we'll call that the corner. I'm going to let him out because he's annoying and Stella will start trying to catch him. In fact, it's gone quieter outside, so go on, he's gone. So I'll leave the window open for a bit. So now I'm up in that corner. Again, I don't want to add anything here because this is my corner, and I don't want to end my thread and start a new thread, so I'm just going to do the same thing again, jump across there and stitch my way back. And if you give this a go, you'll either like it or you won't. That's most things, I suppose. But I know last year when we did it, there was quite a few people that didn't enjoy it because they liked, you know, having a back cloth to stitch onto, a background cloth. But I wanted to do it for this person. I'm not saying any of the names because some of them watch. I don't want to reveal until the actual retreat whose is for whose. So do you see how it's going misshapen? Just because of the way I'm doing it. I don't mind that. I'm just going to push it back where I want it. Just lay it flat and push it down into place and then stitch it there. Again, like I said, because it's very fine cloth, even if I get a little wrinkle or a bump or something, I think what I've done is I've got my two original threads were going one way and the third thread that I added is laying the other way, because thread has a pile or a grain. I don't know what the correct word is, I should. And sometimes if you put two one way and one the other, or one way and one the other, they rub up against each other. They rub each other wrong. So now I can sort all that out. Now I'm there with my needle, I'm going to stitch through that. And that's now all anchored down. So I think what I'll do is I'll go on doing this until I've got my piece the size I want, and then I'll come back and show you what I will then do to finish it off. Otherwise it's going to take me a very long time, and you'll all get bored and go to sleep. Okay, I've finished doing the first stage of the joining and I've measured it, and it's somewhere in the region of the 6 inches that I want, so I'll get that away because that's glary. I've got some bits sticking off the sides, but I think I'll leave them, and then the person who it's for, if they don't like them, they can always cut them off. So there's bits still sticking up here and there, but it is all sort of structurally joined together. There are areas where it's thin because the cloth is very thin, that's the vintage cloth there. So now I want to go over it, address any sticky up bits, that's a technical term, and maybe sew some more little patches over the top. So like I said earlier, it's like time lapse, as if I've created a piece, you know, in the couple of hours that it's taken me, that would otherwise have evolved, you know, in the style of, spirit of, and all that. So my needle's up here with a bit of thread left in it. I'm going to just stitch down to here, I think, and just do something about this. On the way I might, because I just don't really like the look of this little corner. I don't know, something about the angles isn't pleasing me. So I think on the way I'm going to, I've sorted my cloth out into little bits, long bits and bigger bits. Just find a tiny little patch of something, that little piece probably will do, and just put it on the top as if I was patching a hole. And then I can go with my needle and thread, and you see I'm not necessarily working horizontally and vertically, sometimes I've gone under angles, just gone wherever's necessary. So I'm just going to use this little bit of thread just to stitch that on. And like I also said before as well, I'm kind of feeling as well as looking, feeling where it's thin and where it's thick, and you know, so on. This obviously won't have to take any strain because it's going to go in somebody's book, but just, you know, to be in the spirit of how you would approach it if you were physically mending something and trying to make it sturdy, you know, utilitarian. So because I've only got a bit left in my needle, I'm just going to go all the way around the edge of this little patch that I just stitched on. I think I've got just enough for that. And then to finish off, I'm just going to do a back stitch. And then another back stitch, and just come out somewhere and cut it off. I'm not, you know, I could even leave that hanging if you like the look of that, but I'm not worrying too much about it. I'm just, you know, doing what needs to be done. I don't know why I keep saying, you know. You get these, when you sit and talk for an hour or whatever, and then when I go and watch it back, I see these kind of repetitive things that I do, and you know, it's very exposing, you know. It's very exposing. Oh dear. So I've cut off 4, I'll get rid of 1. So because it's 4, you know, 4 strands, you know. You could play a game. You can have a sip of your tea every time I say you know. Play it with tea, don't you know. Stop it. Ugh. Oh dear me. Oh dear, dear, dear me. I'm going to try not to say it now. I'm going to try and thread my needle first. It is very warm here now. It's the afternoon. I had some lunch and then I finished my stitching, and my hands are quite clammy, in my defence. But I'll soldier on. Okay, that's done. So I wanted to stitch this flappy bit down here. And while I'm here, I'm just going to look and see, is there anything in the vicinity that's thin, or that I don't like the look of, and I'm going to look at both sides. I think I'm just going to stitch that down first, and I do think I want to cover up the back of this cloth, because I'm not entirely loving the back of that commercial print there. So I'm going to find another one of my little bits. So it's as if these are my little precious scraps that I've got from, you know, that I've saved for mending. Just that bit, doesn't have to cover it completely. I'm just going to put that on there like that. In fact, I might put it down that way a bit and just leave a bit of that showing. It's just a decision that I made in the moment. I'm going to come through from the back of one of my pieces just to somewhat hide my tail without worrying too much about it. And then I'm going to go back first, so a back stitch. And that should, if I give it a little tug, you see that's quite secure. There's no need for a knot. I'm just going to stitch around the edge of that piece. In fact, this piece here is also a bit thin, so I may well come back and put something over that. You can just keep adding to it until, you know, until either you're happy with how it looks or you're fed up with working on it, you know, so it's, you know, or you don't want to work on it anymore. Depending on what you're going to use it for. If you're going to use it for something with a bit of structural necessity, like a bag or something, then obviously you would need to make sure it was sturdy. Pull that up again, put it back. So now I'm going to just jump onto this patch. Actually, I might come up underneath it. And just stitch all around the edge of it. Sometimes I do that, I stitch around the edge, sometimes I just keep going up backwards and forwards in one direction and then backwards and forwards in the other direction. You see both if you look at Authentic Boro, you see both. It's just whatever decision the stitch has made in the moment. It might be to do with the shape of the patch that they have available, or the shape of the hole that needs to be repaired, or the worn spot. It might be to do with how much thread they had. You know, in their needle. It might be, I said it again, it might be, you know, any number of, I said it again, any number of reasons, sorry. When you notice, it's hard to unnotice. I apologise if it's irritating. So I've gone all the way around the edge of there, a couple more stitches, back to where I started from. I'm just going to have another little feel of it here and there. I wanted to put something there. I'm not sure actually now, I do quite like that tear, but I might want to put some stitches in it. So I'm just going to stitch myself over there. So I'm just going wherever I need to, I'm just travelling over the cloth in whatever direction I need to go in, and turning it as I need to. I think I'm going to just kind of do some quite big overcast stitches as if I'm mending that tear. And what I can then do, even, just get to the other side, which isn't really traditional Boro, at least not as far as I've seen, but I think I might just do a bit of a darn through there. So I'm just going to come up, and obviously those stitches are quite far apart, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to go over, under, because it's another mending technique, and you know, we're in the spirit of, so we're free to elaborate and bring our own voice to the piece. So now I'm going back the other way, obviously where I went over before I'm going under, and vice versa. And when I get to the other side, I just take a little anchoring stitch down into the cloth. I might just do a third line, so I'm just going back up, over, under, over, under. There we go. Just being a little bit careful with the tension with those longer stitches. And I'll just take that final anchoring stitch, and that's just a little, it's become a design element. It's, you know, it's become a thing, a focal point. So now I'm looking at the other side, and the same thing again. This is very thin, this, but I don't really want to cover it because it's the vintage Japanese kimono cotton. and I think I'd rather just leave it. Like I said, it's going in a book, so I think it would be a shame to cover that up. I'm not very happy about this little weird thing going on here. So I want to sew something over that. That little patch of, that little piece of wool that I wanted to use. I'm going to use this side, which has got a very faint line of red stitching in it. I'm just going to put that on like that. And on the back, excuse me, I am going to end up stitching over my darn, but that's just what would happen if this was, if you were actually mending it. From the other side, you would stitch over previous mends. You would do what needs to be done. But I'm just aware of that, and I've decided to just let it happen. I'm going to stitch further off my patch, and then I'm going to go jump over a bit and then just come back the other way. Again, feeling all the time for the bulk. That was very fine wool, so I'm not worried that it's getting too thick. But I'm just feeling it in my hands to make sure that I'm happy with the texture of it and the thickness of it. See, it wasn't what I said about the threads, it's just being annoying. I don't know why. Sometimes it doesn't usually happen with this thread. I don't think it's the needle. Sometimes it's the cloth or the combination of cloths. It might be because my hands are clammy, like I said. Okay, so now I've got the lines all going one way. I'll just have a look at my darn. You see I have stitched over my darn, but I still like it. It still feels right to me. So now I think I'm going to go and stitch the other way over this patch. So I'm just going to stitch myself where I need to be to go perpendicular to the first line of stitches, and that is something you see quite often. You see a patch just laid on. Sometimes the edges are turned under, not always. This is wool, so it wouldn't fray anyway. And I'm going raw edge. And then, so the patch is just laid on, and then there's a line of stitches going one way and a line of stitches going the other way to hold the patch down. Okay, so I've got more thread, and I've done a couple more lines through over my little patch. Just turning around to go this way just once more. And then I'll see where else I need to do something. Right, so let's have a look. So I want something here because I'm not happy about this either. I think I don't like all these little triangle points meeting. So I'm happier with that side. I have to obviously decide which side I'm going to couch my circle. I could of course couch a circle on both sides if I wanted to. Not sure about this little space either. I might just put a little tiny patch on there while I'm in the vicinity. Maybe that piece. It's just all the time adding interest. I might put it that way actually. And that's got an interesting shape on the end. Okay, I've sewn that on. I just did 3 lines of stitching going in the same, the same direction. This little piece here is very thin. This is a bit of old sheet that I dyed with indigo. So I do think I want to just reinforce it a bit. What you'll also find is, although I've tried to be careful with my tension, the areas that are more heavily stitched will pull in, and then the areas that are less heavily or not stitched will stay, stay where they are. So you will get this puckering going on. The way to deal with that would be to do heavy stitching all over, and then it will all, sit together. My issue is that I don't really want to do lots of heavy stitching on these one single layers. Well, maybe, I don't know. I'll see when I get there. I'm making it up as I go along. What I think I'll do here is just put a little long strip just on the edge. Use some more of this. Throw it this way up. And I don't want to go the whole way because that feels a bit precise. I'm just going to cut a bit. So I need to get out there. I think I'll carry on the direction I'm going. I'll just stitch my way along there. In fact, I might just put a little piece there as well. Let's just put a little piece there. Since I'm stitching that way anyway, I might as well stitch something on. Down a bit. But I hope you can see how this can be absorbing as a process, because it's not that you sit down with a plan. I mean, that's all slow stitching really to a degree. You just sit down with a pile of cloth scraps and a needle and thread, and you create something from next to nothing. And you have no kind of view in advance about what's going to go where. You just you start, you put two pieces together, and then you go from there. And I had this size limitation because of the project that I'm working on. But if you just wanted to do this as an exercise, you can just make your piece whatever size and shape it ends up as. I think I'm going to put something else in this corner as well. Now I can't stop adding pieces. To put this little piece. I just like the idea of that checky part, that checked part of a piece of cloth just sticking out the edge there. And like I said, I think a couple of times, because my cloth's all thin and old, I can do this. If you only have new cloth, certainly launder it, and that will get the sizing out of it and, you know, wear it down a bit. Or otherwise just begin collecting old cloth if you want to do this kind of thing and you like the look of it. There's many places you can find old cloth. Start in your own home with stuff that you don't use anymore, or I have no problem with repurposing my own clothes. Most of my clothes were thrifted in the first place anyway. I'd much rather do that than go and buy new cloth, even if there's a garment that's still wearable. There's so many 90 million tons of textile waste goes to landfill every year. I think it's 90 million, 90, landfill, unrecyclable or unrecycled. So don't feel bad about cutting up clothes that still are good. I have been criticised for that in the past, but I'm happy to explain to people why I don't mind cutting up clothes that still have wear in them. So I'm just going to go back and stitch along the other edge of this, and I'm still just working my way around. You see, I was intending to put something there and I've ended up doing something else entirely. I will come back to there. So even if you plan, your plan can change. And I want that kind of layered feel, that layered textural Boro type feel to it. As if it's a well-worn, well-loved, raggy piece of clothing or household linen or whatever. Right, let's go back to this. I think I will put it dark side up actually. And I think I'm going to put it just in from the edge, and it's almost forming a bridge between these two sturdier bits and supporting this thin bit. I'm just going to stitch straight up towards it, which means I'm going to come out part way along it, but that's alright because my thread's going to run out in a minute anyway. Again, I could pin it, but I'll just get a few stitches in and it will stay. Again, I'm working on the table. Actually, when I went to sit on the sofa to eat my lunch, I took this little felt mat that Machtelt bought me. Thank you, Machtelt. I took it with me with all my stuff on and used it on my lap as a surface, and that worked really well. So if you've got one of these and you hadn't, and you hadn't thought of using it on your knee, which I hadn't until that moment. Although they're quite firm, they're not very flippy floppy. So
So I'm going to finish this off in the same way, just with a little back stitch. So I'm going to go ahead doing that here and there, and until I think I'm happy with it, and then I'll come back and show you the finished piece of Boro inspired cloth when it's all done, and then I'll put my red circle on it, so I'll be back in a little while. Okay, an hour and nearly 2 hours later I've finished sewing bits on, so it feels right, it feels good. I've just gone around sewing patches where I thought I needed to. There are still some single layer unstitched spots here and there. This is linen on the edge here, so that was quite sturdy. And that's the other side. I've done a little bit of overcast here and there. So I was going for how it looked, but also how it feels. And yeah, I'm very happy with it. And it now lays more or less flat. The other thing to note, when you do an excessive amount of stitching, when you do a lot of stitching, it will shrink a bit. It shrunk maybe somewhere 1/8 or even 1/4 of an inch in part. So if you want something to be a specific size, you need to bear that in mind. Always make it bigger if you're going to do a lot of stitching. So the final thing to do is put my circle on. I've got my template, and I'm going to, I've decided on the other side actually. I wanted the little darn to be the centre, or it won't be the exact centre, but it will be inside the circle. And these little dangly bits that are too long, I've put them at the bottom. I just like the idea of them hanging down. So I'm going to put my template on by eye, my paper template, and put some pins in it. And you've seen me do this before if you've been here a while, so I won't share the whole process with you. But I'll pin this on, and then I'll stitch around the edge with my red thread. Just a line of running stitch, and then when I've done that, then I'll couch my wool on. So when I get to couching the wool, I'll come back and share that part. Okay, I'm coming back round to the beginning of my circle. So I'm just eyeballing the space I've got left in terms of how many stitches I fit. So stitch, space, stitch, I need to make them slightly smaller, just so you don't end up with something obvious where you started. And then I'll go through to the back with my needle while I get paper off. Could of course draw around something, or you know, rather than stitching around a circle of paper, but I like stitching around circles of paper, so that's why I do it like that. I wanted this red line of stitching visible. If I didn't, what I would have done is stitched it with a neutral coloured thread and then couched over it, if that makes sense. So I've come up here where I started. I want my circle, I just left my needle poking out. I want my circle, the two little tails, to be at the bottom. I should really have started at the bottom, but I'm hot and a bit tired and I didn't think of it. It's very hot here. It's kind of muggy, it's gone overcast, you know, that muggy feeling. So I'll just start where I am. So I've just cut myself a piece of wool that's plenty long enough. I want my couch circle to be inside, actually, inside my stitch circle. So I'm coming up inside, and I'm just going to by eye space it about 1/4 of an inch away. Sorry for the noise, but if I really can't shut the windows. So I'm just doing my little hop across and take a stitch forward on the other side. And then, I hope you can see, and then take the thread back across and then a little stitch forward. I'm just guiding the wool into place with my thumb all the way around. Okay, I'm coming around to where I want my tails to be. I've got a feeling I showed you this last time, the stitching on of the wool circle. It was a few weeks ago because I filmed it before my daughter came, so apologies if I'm repeating myself. But I do, just when I finish doing this, want to show you the back as well. So I'll go and finish this, and then I'll come back and show you the back. Basically, just to recap, or if you didn't watch last time, I'm going to leave two little tails of wool at the beginning and the end. and I'm going to couch them down as well. Couch them down, couch those down, the tails. So I should have started at the bottom, so I started and finished with the tails. I didn't, so I'm going to have to finish off my thread and go back, jump back up to there, because I can't. You might be tempted to lay that on now and then couch from here to there. The issue with that is you can't really judge what tension your stitches will make in the wool, so it might pucker and go out of shape. So I am going to finish off and jump up and couch back down. So I'll be back when I've done that. Okay, so I've got to where my tails cross at the bottom. I might need to trim that one, but I'll leave it for now. So I'm just going to hold it in place with my thumb. I've got my thread at the back, so I need to come back up. Maybe just one more stitch there. And then I'm going to basically do a cross stitch across where the threads cross. There's another fly come in, but the window's open, so hopefully he'll go out again. So you see how the wool makes a cross, so I'm just going to stitch across that way to anchor that down. And I'm going to go up and come up in between at the top there and do a little cross that way. I mean, sometimes I butt the ends up of the wool, you know, so it looks like a complete circle, but it's always difficult to get it to look so you can't see the join. So these days I'm much more inclined to just make a feature of it. And then I'm going to couch that little tail down as well. You could just leave it flying in the breeze if you wanted to, but I started couching them down on the other one, so I'm just going to be consistent. Just going to snip it slightly shorter. So just the same thing as before, hop over, go forward, hop back. And the advantage of this way of couching, well, I couch like this because I like the rhythm of the stitching more than the diagonal going underneath every time thing. But the advantage of it is when you turn it over to the back, and I need to sneak my way through to come and couch the other tail down, so I'll show you while we're here, is you get lines of running stitch on the back, or what looks like running stitch. So you've got my original line that I stitched around the paper, and then you've got two little lines of tiny running stitches which appeared from the way I couch. If I'd couched in that way of going under the wool every time, you'd have diagonal lines on the back, which I don't find as pleasing to look at, but you know, that's maybe me. So I want to end up back up here somewhere, so I'm going to just go into the layers somewhere and get my needle through so it doesn't show on the front. And then come back through, to go over slightly. It's making quite a big jump on the back, so I'm going to work my way over again. Make sure I'm in the right place. And couch this tail down as well. So there we go, that's my 5th page, a rather wonky square, but that's my style. Inspired by, in the spirit of Japanese Boro. So that's my front with my little darn and my circle, and that's the back. So that's a double-sided page, although obviously if she chooses to, she can sew it onto something and hide the back, but well, there we go. So that's my 5th. I'm halfway there, which is great because September will be here before I know it. So do go and check out the other video on Boro if you're interested. Where I think I talk more there about the cultural context and so on. And also under that video there are some links to Boro channels run by or presented by Japanese people who know obviously more about it than I do. Specifically somebody called Atsushi, I can't remember the name of his channel, but if you go and look at my other video, all the links are there. And also if you're interested and you haven't seen it or you don't remember my introduction to Slowstitch from over a year ago, 18 months ago, just, you know, if you want to recap. I'm wittering now because I'm so hot. I'm going to go and get a cold drink and hope it cools down and say thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to you joining me next time for more cloth tales. Bye bye.